If your players are offline, are connected to a local area network that doesn't have access to the internet, or you simply don't want to connect to bsn.cloud, you can still set up a player using on-device setup. In this tutorial, you will learn how to manually set up a device without using BrightAuthor Connected, using a keyboard and mouse, or by using a computer and browser. In this first example, we'll be configuring a player to operate as a standalone unit. For this setup method, you will need to connect a keyboard to your player, and if you have a USB hub handy, connecting both a keyboard and mouse can be useful. If the player doesn't have USB, you can connect it to a local area network and access the setup page from a browser. Make sure that your player is powered and connected to a display over HDMI. Connect your keyboard and optional mouse to the player over USB. The player must have a blank exFAT or FAT32 formatted micro SD card installed. Once the player boots up, you will see the bright sign device setup page. You can stop the timer if you need more time, or press next. If you only have a keyboard connected, use the tab key to cycle through the options. There are 4 networking options to choose from. If you have a Wi-Fi module installed on your device, the Wi-Fi network option will be enabled. And if you have photos and video directly saved to your SD card, you can select this option to play the files immediately. In this example, select No Network as the networking option. Add a name and description and specify the time zone of your player. Because you're not connected to the internet, the BrightSign OS option is not available. When you press Finish, your player will be ready to accept content published directly to its SD card. You can watch the tutorial on scheduling and publishing for details. Now let's try another example. But first, we need to delete the previous setup file from the microSD card and factory reset the player. Power down the player and delete the files from the microSD card. Now, press and hold the Reset and Service buttons, then reapply power. You can release the buttons when you see the error light flashing rapidly. With the player reset and a blank microSD card inserted, a new manual setup can be applied to the player. In this next example, you will be setting up the player to accept published presentations over a local area network. Select Ethernet as the connection type. You will need to connect your player over Ethernet to your local area network. Follow the on-screen instructions and make sure that your player receives an IP address via DHCP. Alternatively, you can press Change Settings to enter a static IP address. Mark down your IP address. You'll need this information later when you publish content to your player. Next, you'll see a network diagnostic page that checks the Ethernet and internet connection. From here, you can select one of the 4 publishing options. Choose Local File Networking and enter a device name and description. If your player is connected to the internet, you can specify to make sure it gets the latest BrightSign OS. Under Advanced Features, you can enable the Diagnostic Web Server. In this configuration, the Local Web Server option is grayed out because using local file networking utilizes this feature by default. Finally, your screen will read waiting for content to be published. In this last example, we will be setting up a player to connect to your own web server using a method called Simple File Networking. Similar to the previous example, factory reset your player and wipe your SD card. On the device setup page, select Ethernet as the connection type. Plug in the Ethernet cable and then make sure that your player receives an IP address. Select Simple File Networking from the publishing options. Enter a name, description, time zone, and specify if you want the player to update to the latest BrightSign OS. Now enter the URL where your player will check for content. Click Advanced to specify the content check interval. If your web server is set up to accept authentication credentials, you can enter them here. You can also enable local DWS and local web server on your player by checking the appropriate boxes. For more details about this configuration, watch the tutorial on advanced player setup. One thing to note is that if you plug in the player to Ethernet before you see the white manual setup interface, the player may attempt automatic setup, and you could see the purple activation screen. You can also visit the same manual setup interface by visiting the URL from a computer on your local network. Now that your player is ready to receive content, watch the tutorial on building and publishing presentations. Thanks for watching the on-device setup tutorial.